This is The Change Physician, episode 207.
Hey, folks, welcome back to another episode of The Change Physician. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my amazeballs co-host, Dr. Melissa Cady. Dr. Cady, how are you today?
I'm great.
You're great. I'm almost feeling like we should do almost like a radio announcer style for some sort of event.
I feel like I'm the Kellogg's Tiger Great.
They're great. We're great. All right. So enough banter. Let's get into the meat of the episode here. And I want to talk about influence. Influence. And not just influence, but really literally the book Influence. So
Yes.
for those of that you don't know, this is like a classic text by Robert Cialdini called Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion. It's gone through a number of different editions. He's also written a kind of a follow-up book called Persuasion that is less about, it has more to do with about the environment that persuasion occurs in, and then ultimately into the latest updated and revised edition of Influence, where he took his 6 principles and added a 7th principle in influence. As you can see, I'm a big fan. If you start getting in kind of the sales and marketing world, this book is typically recommended or not, oftentimes. And just to kind of start off, what's really interesting is Dr. Cialdini actually wrote this as almost like a manual and guide to help people to protect themselves from what he calls influence practitioners or persuasion strategists, which are AKA salespeople. Because a good salesperson can amplify feelings where you're going to want to buy things that you perhaps don't need, and or to buy things that aren't necessarily the best for you, or on a grander scheme, join into a society that may not be beneficial for you, aka cults. What he found, interestingly enough, as this is kind of typical for medicine as well, is that prevention doesn't work really well. So trying to sell prevention doesn't actually work. And so what ended up was all these influence people, aka salesmen, and anybody who wants to know about psychology to kind of motivate and change people's behaviors, they buy that. They all know this stuff. This is like a classic sales text. So I want to talk about these 7 kind of commonalities to influence that Dr. Cialdini has discovered through his own research. And again, I like people have data. What's really interesting when you kind of look at the sales and marketing strategy, you can go back 100+ years of books that have been written about sales and influence. And what I love about this book, where you have actually a PhD who's gone through and now done research studies to support them, is a lot of those influence practitioners were so good at just monitoring human psychology and kind of doing this little feedback of, I'm doing this and someone buys, or I'm doing this and someone changes their behavior. That's not necessarily evidence, but evidence has now supported those activities and also disconfirmed some of the things that people thought were useful, but actually weren't. So are you ready for a little influence discussion?
I am. Are we going to list them all out at once first, or are we going to go one by one?
I want to list them one by one, and then we'll do a summary at the end. Okay. Because I think it's a little bit easier to introduce one, have a discussion on that, and then we can introduce the next one, and then we'll summarize at the end for the listener so that they can remember what these are and hopefully recognize them when you see them, because they are ubiquitous and you will see them virtually every day. And if you're watching anything, including YouTube, you're going to see them because they're in the commercials.
And why is it important for physicians to know this?
Oh God.
You don't have to go into it now, but we'll probably have a discussion.
Well, there's a reason why drug reps are limited. And that reason isn't because, oh, everybody's mean and they don't want me to get free stuff. Like salespeople don't come in your office and give you free stuff because they're nice people. And that just kills me. And I'm completely aware, and that doesn't influence me at all. Really, because you're monitoring your behavior and actually tracking what you do, as compared to like the research showing that when someone gives you something, that you're not going to actually do something back, which actually leads us into influence topic number 1, which is called the principle of reciprocity. So reciprocity is sort of this kind of ingrained behavior that if someone does an action or deed or gives us something, then we feel more responsible, or we feel almost obligated to return the favor. It's incredibly common. And again, so why would drug recs come in? And this is different in this day and age because of like the Sunshine Act, and it's certainly not the way it was when we were in internship. And certainly when I was in medical school, it was, I remember going to one of our doc's office, and the reps were just dropping off Cubs tickets, and the doc couldn't go. He would just give them to me and my wife, and we would go to Cubs games. So that doesn't happen really anymore for good reasons. But it just, the fact of someone giving you a pencil does increase the likelihood that you are going to do something back for them, that you are actually going to do something back. So how do people use this? Well, compliments is actually one way that they can increase reciprocity. Is could they compliment you and you feel like that's something important to you, or that you think that there's very gratitude, they're being very gracious to you, then you're more inclined to actually do something nice back to them. What else do you want to know about reciprocity? Because I don't want to go to. Is
there an increased tendency stereotypically for women to do more reciprocity than men? Do they say
that? I don't know. That's an excellent question. And I can't remember if you could scrub that versus if there is a sex difference. In fact, I don't remember. It's been a number of years since I've actually read this particular version. And
the number of female physicians compared to maybe when the studies, if they have studies that show numbers of physicians, and there's, I don't know, because there's more male physicians, obviously, 20, 30
Well,
years.
and I mean, most of the data on this stuff, like most of the data for this book is not on medicine per se.
Right, that's true.
Most of the, now granted, there are studies of physician behavior that has been influenced by the introduction of gifts by the industry. But I'm not sure if they ever broke them down into sex difference, but that would be kind of interesting to know. So biggest thing is to kind of protect yourself is just and it's not to say don't be a nice person. I mean, this is kind of the one way you can use it is do good deeds for others, right? If you're being nice to other people, complimenting them, bringing the nurses donuts or whatever, that is a good deed, and you're more likely to get back behavior that is favorable to you. So if you're in a challenging and work environment, maybe you're the new doc, and you want to do it in a way that's abusive or that people get used to it. That's one of the other things, because one of the key things about influence principles is the more aware you are of them, the less strength that they have upon you. Now, it never goes away.
Right.
The influence never goes away, but the more aware you are, the more likely you are to interrupt it and to not follow blindly through.
Right.
So
I can see that.
So bring people donuts. If you're the new person, bring them on the first date.
Food.
Don't bring them every day.
Don't let them get used to it.
And don't get used to it. But doing something nice for another person is a very good way to invoke that reciprocal behavior back to you. And if you notice somebody is doing something nice, just kind of remember, okay, this person's doing something nice for me. Because if they ask you something afterward, just know, maybe, just be knowing that it doesn't mean you're not going to have to do it. Just know that you are more likely and primed to do so.
Yeah. So you're like, right. That's why when you're like that spouse or boyfriend or whatever, it's like, what do they want?
I always find it interesting, and some of these are going to bleed over a little bit in some of the other influence principles, because there is some kind of similar tendencies with them. I'll just hold this particular little thing I want to talk about until later. But let's go on to number 2, since we have a number of these to get through. So we just covered reciprocity, which is, I give you something, I scratch your back, you scratch mine, kind of a thing. And scarcity is limited in number. So when things tend to be scarce, they tend to be perceived as more valuable.
Yes.
Right. So how do people, there's both time and number sort of scarcity that's involved with this. Why do we have deadlines? Why do we have sales? Why do sales have deadlines? Is to create an atmosphere of scarcity. Or if we have limited number, which is more powerful than the time deadline. We only have 10 of these. We only have 5 of those. If you call now, we're going to throw in a set of encyclopedias, but it's only in the next 15 minutes, that kind of a thing. So scarcity kind of increases this desire as well.
And value. When you look at real estate.
Well, and that's one of the little pitfalls right in this particular moment in time has to do with this idea of scarcity. So we are in this buying frenzy. This is the absolute worst time to buy. And I see a lot of posts again, like in the physician groups, and people say, "Oh, should I buy now? The prices are going crazy." You take a freaking step back and take a breather here, because having done it, obviously, we bought at the peak of the last real estate bubble here, and I wouldn't recommend that for anybody. And some people are going to argue that this isn't exactly the same. No, blah blah blah. But really try to make it as non-emotional as you can. Don't get caught up in the hype. Black Friday sales, when people run in and there's only 3 TVs or whatever they're selling, that principle of scarcity is being cued into involved. And part of this has to do with loss aversion. So we are more primed to view loss of something as compared to a gain. So when we hear there's 5 and you can get this, and then you don't get it, or you were too late or whatever, and you lost, then you have this, oh my God, I regretted because I didn't pick this up when I should have picked it up. Those are all scarcity components.
FOMO, fear of missing out.
FOMO is a big one, fear of missing out. And again, if you don't think that that these apply to you, well, when was the last time you had FOMO? Yeah, it's so scarcity is a fun one to play with, and it's interesting in the online world because it doesn't necessarily have to be true scarcity; it can be manufactured scarcity. So, if you are one of the people out there who has side gigs and maybe you're selling something, how can you introduce false scarcity? So, something that is produced on the internet, say a Kindle book, there is no limit on a Kindle book, right? Because it's electronic little data bits. But you can have sales, in which case for this particular time, we're going to have a sale price of, and that allows you to introduce an element of scarcity and increase kind of buying behavior as well. All right. So scarcity, like these are all so cool that we could probably do episodes on all of them. And maybe we will, but let's do the overview here. So number 3 here is authority. This one has a lot of importance to us as physicians.
Yes.
Because this also has to do with the words that we have and the impact that we do. So those who are perceived in a position of authorities, weight tends to have, or the weight of their opinions carries greater weight. That was a dumb, stupid sentence.
It works. We all know what you mean.
but you can see this happening. Joe Blow may say something that makes a lot of sense, but if you don't already trust him, which we're going to get into another element of influence a little bit here, you're not going to listen to Joe Blow, even if it may be the most amazing piece of advice. If Joe Blow is Dr. Joe Blow, or Joe Blow is an economic professor at Harvard, those credentials then allow you to perceive an element of an authority with it, and you're more likely to listen to an authority in something than someone who doesn't have that authority. There's been some fascinating studies on authority in general. Some people I can't remember if it was the Milgram studies. There's 2, I think it was Stanley Milgram, with the studies where they were giving shocks. So this was after the Holocaust, and people want to understand, well, how in the world do you get a population to do horrible, atrocious things to other people? And so what Stanley Milgram did is he was trying to actually just prove that he wanted to show that people were basically bad. Like if your pupil did it, it was bad, and it wasn't because of any other reason. And he proved the exact opposite. So he took people in. He had an actor strapped to these electrodes, and then on the other side, they had somebody that was administering electric shocks. They were turning up a dial, and they had an authority figure in a white coat. And the basically instructions is put, when we give you instruction, turn the dial to 1, shock the recipient, continue to upgrade the date as you are instructed until the whatever fake doctor guy tells not to. And the horrifying thing about these studies is basically as they shock this individual, and the actor who's not getting shocked, but would, writhe and actually, I don't think they could see him. I think they could just hear him, but they would shock him and he'd be like, ow, that hurt. And then they go, should we stop? No, don't stop. Authority figure tells the person administering the shock, go to level 2, shock them again. They started getting up to 7, 8, 9, like what are supposedly really intense electrical activity, enough that almost can kill a person. The actor is screaming on the other side, begging, saying, don't do it anymore. And I can't remember the actual percentages, but the majority of people continued to administer these electric shocks simply because the authority figure told them to, up to levels that could potentially, if they were true, would have actually killed the actor on the other side. So it is quite a big deal, to just recognize that authority figures can have a huge influence on what you tend to do. And in an absence of an environment where there are other people to help you, you are more likely to comply as well. So that's a all these things have a dark side, and that one can particularly have a heavy dark side with it.
I mean, that's definitely how much like a patient respects that authority level or that authority figure. There probably could be some variability too, for various reasons.
Well, and that's the other thing. So we'll kind of split in the middle here. We covered reciprocity, scarcity, and authority here. We have 3 more to cover plus 1. And the one thing to remember, these are influence principles. Okay, they are not magic wands. Like there's always going to be exceptions to the rule because this is psychology versus physics in a lot of ways, although in physics sometimes there's an exception, but not as often. So what you're looking at is there's a proportion. These are majority indicators rather than overwhelming. Like not everybody's going to comply with these things. There's generally exceptions,
right?
And that's just kind of keeping it in mind but when you kind of put more and more of these influence principles into action, the tendency to behave in a particular way goes up, and it goes up in such a way that it's a perceived difference that actually is measurable and is measurable and scientifically valid, right? So that it's not this random occurrence here. There's the majority will do when they're subjected to specific influence principles. All right. So we covered reciprocity, we covered scarcity, we covered authority, which kind of derailed a little bit because it can be so dark. And then there's consistency. Consistency and commitment. This is actually one of my favorites, to be honest, because if you get someone to take an action, then they're more likely to take that action again.
Right.
Or do things that are similar in that regard. And one of the famous tests that they did with this was as simple as asking people, do you identify with being a environmentalist? And they would go door to door, and people would say, yeah, I believe in protecting the environment. Or maybe they didn't call them an environmentalist, but I think there's something, do you believe in protecting the environment? Something like that. People would come to the door, and if people said, yes, I believe in protecting the environment. And they say, well, would you put the sticker on your car that's basically protect the environment or protect Mother Earth or whatever? Yes, I'll take that sticker. Well, then they would come back later and say, hey, would you put up this 5x5 sign in your yard with big old posts in the front corner, this big ugly sign that says, protect the earth or whatever? And they didn't say it like that. Obviously, they said, "Hey, we've identified you, and you said you were you said that you're an environmental. The environment is important for us, and you really, really appreciate the fact that you put that sticker on your car. We have one more ask for you. Would you be willing to show your commitment and to this cause to save Mother Earth by putting the sign in your yard?" And again, because you have taken this path of, yes, this is who I am. Yes, I'll do the small step of putting the sticker or whatever it was, sign in your window. You are significantly more likely to do the next big step of putting a big ugly sign in the yard which if they had just started with that, no one would have said yes to. So consistent in commitment is really cool. Like if you have someone that you're working with, I mean, it's really cool. You're trying to manipulate people or trying to persuade them, but you can use this in a really great way. Because if you get people to start taking small, healthy steps, in fact, even identifying the need to want to take a small, healthy step, you can introduce greater and greater change towards that path that you're hoping that they achieve. And they're more likely to actually proceed with it. So,
like in a negative way, and show up at the Capitol, January 6th, 2021.
Exact same thing, right? So in essence, these are not, the thing about influence and persuasion is not evil. It's simply a tool. So
either side.
You can either say, so you can put your head in the hand and say salespeople are sleazy, used cars, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't listen to that stuff. It never has an effect on me. Bury your head. It absolutely does, depending on the context. I guarantee it will. Or you can learn about it and then become more aware of when they're being introduced upon you, be a little bit more clear and say, wait a second here, what's going on? Am I falling prey to any of these sort of influence strategies? And then potentially apply it in a good way as well. Good being, what is good? We're get into a philosophical discussion, but
I have to make a comment though. The consistency and commitment part, it's fascinating when you integrate social media and how you can automate the consistency and the commitment, and the person on the other end feels a relationship to this person, even though they never met the person or the group or the mission, and the hashtags, and we talked about like the stop steal and all that as an example, but this repetition is so powerful that I don't think people really give it enough credit on how you hear people repeating in person that never met the person that started the thing, and they don't even know where it came from, but now it's like part of their vernacular or their language.
Yeah, it's outside of this episode, and I don't have all the notes, and it hasn't been digested enough in my brain, but I really would like to do an episode on the effect on words and behavior, and how when you say something, how that changes both your psychology as well as your physiology. It's really fascinating, and it makes you kind of be very, very watchful of the words that you use and what other people are saying around you. Anyway, so because there is this effect of when you start saying things and how that changes your perception and changes your reality. It actually changes your memories of things as well. So anyway, that's a dark thing. So we've got
and if you got children, this applies to you in a household with those children too.
Oh, my daughter did this. Oh my God. Yeah, I was this is actually shortly after I read Influence, I think. And I was really in depth in like studying sales and marketing. And my daughter, I mean, I don't think I even talked about this, but we were sitting around the table one day, and she goes, her brother Aiden, she goes, Aiden, are you a good person?
Oh my gosh.
He's like, yeah, I think I'm a good person. She goes, okay. Would you do this for me? Like, wow. It was so masterful. and I'm watching like a 6-year-old say this, and I was like, holy crap, kids. I was just like, that was amazing. And then of course I had to blow up because I'm like, oh my God, do you know what you just did? And just look at me like, Dad, you're crazy. Yeah. But it is like, if you get somebody to say something, are you this type of person? This is part of the reason when you look at things like motivational interviewing. So motivational interviewing, if you get someone to identify those key motivators, some of that is who they are. And if you can then key those to the activity that you want them to do. So do you believe that you are, I'm trying to think like motivational interviewing for something like weight loss. And if you just come in and say, oh, you're obese and this, and that doesn't work. We've talked about information doesn't work at all. But if you get them to identify that they are X type of person, maybe that they're a loving mother, and then to be a loving mother, you want to stay healthy and provide a role model for your kids. And then so there's a commitment into that new kind of identity shift. And then say, well, part of that is what do healthy people do? What would a mother do as a role model for your child? Oh, well, I'm going to do a daily walk with my kids. And so he kind of introduced these little principles here in such a way that to get people taking the simple step of saying, this is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
And then doing those little tiny actions of, well, if people like me do things like this.
Right.
So
good stuff.
Consistency. Again, I like consistency. And from a self standpoint, this also, we talk about this stuff works for others. It can actually work on you as well. So doing the steps that you need to take to commit to your goals. So being very consistent to the person that you believe you are through the actions that you do is a way to kind of establish those habits of behavior and to kind of reaffirm that identity that you're moving towards or maybe moving away from. If you're, sure. I'm an ex-smoker, I'm doing this, ex-smokers do this kind of a thing. So, all right. Reciprocity, we talked about, where you scratch my back, I scratch yours, or basically, actually, that's not the same. It's I scratch your back first.
And then you scratch mine.
Then you're more likely to scratch mine. Right. Scarcity, we perceive things that when they're scarce as more valuable, and that scarcity can be manufactured, may not be true. Another good example of scarcity is diamonds. Diamonds are actually incredibly common, but De Beers has cornered the market and releases them in little bits and pieces. With a also brilliant 100+ year marketing campaign of how diamonds are forever. And that's the marker of love. It's like really a common stone. Authority, the danger, the authority, if someone with authority that you perceive as an authority figure, if they say or recommend something, you're more likely to follow through with that, particularly when you're in an absence of information. Consistency, get people to take a small action that is along the path that you want them to go, and they're more likely to proceed along that. And then that leads us into liking. Liking is the simple strategy. If you like me, you're more likely to listen to me. So people all say know, like, and trust. If I'm friendly with you, if I smile at you, if we talked a little bit about reciprocity and bringing in donuts, but if you like me and I'm bringing in donuts, then you're more likely to like me as well. Doing small actions for you, then you're more likely to listen to me. And there's a lot of people that you like, and they may even ask you to do something that you don't necessarily agree with, but you're like, man, John's such a nice guy, I'm just going to do this for him. If you've ever done that, you have been, I'm not going to say the victim of, but you have been influenced by liking. This is one of the reasons taller people tend to get listened to me more. They have, taller sense that has a sense of authority with it. Attractive people. There's a lot of data when it comes to attraction.
Sales reps for pharmaceuticals.
Sales reps for pharmaceuticals tend to not be short, squat, what we're typically perceived not as the ideals of beauty in society. That's typically not the way it is. And so if attractive people are more likely to be liked simply on the modus of being attractive. There was some other details and I can't remember off the top of my head, so I'm not going to bring those in.
Surprised I didn't say likability versus liking.
Well, I think liking and likability is very similar.
Yeah. I guess likability is I guess to me they're pretty much the same, but maybe okay.
And they may have mentioned it both as likability and liking. I'm using my note card, which is actually from another book that talked about these principles, because these are many details. Because the liking one, there's also some stuff where, like, because some of these can backfire. If you're viewed as attractive, people are more likely to like you, but if you reject them, they're more likely to hate you. So there's this amplification.
Gotta give them what they want.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting, because it's not like to say that people who are attractive, they do have decided advantages, but there are some disadvantages to be extraordinarily attractive too, because people take the rejection from them much more personally than they would, and that kind of goes into the idea that these are influence or persuasion strategies, and so they're kind of amplifying these human emotions.
Yeah.
So reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and the last one is consensus. Consensus kind of can go hand in hand with that consistency strategy. But when we are in a situation, particularly in situations of stress, when we are uncertain, we look to the other for what the actions are. We talked about traveling on a couple episodes back ago. If you're in a new place and you don't know what to do, you will typically look at those around you to see what they were doing to follow through. You can be a good thing. Like, oh, I'm getting off the plane and I don't know where, and I don't speak the language. I don't know where customs is. Oh, these people are walking that way. I'm going to walk that way. But it can also be, and a not good. I mean, again, there's the other side of the little sharp edge on this thing is, mob behavior is a consensus strategy. So people say, oh, I can't believe those people did all that. I would never do that. Well, I can guarantee you, well, I shouldn't say I guarantee, if you are in a mob of behavior and they're doing something and you're carried forward with it and you agree, well, I shouldn't say agree, but you tend to agree with the overall principles, you are more likely to carry through with the same behaviors. One example, you can get yourself in trouble. So I'm going to, there's a person that I know rather intimately that went and visited one of his friends in college. And at that visit, his friend's college's football team beat another team on the road that they weren't supposed to beat, and the entire town went crazy. And this person who shall not be named, that I know very, very well and very, very intimately, I mean, it's almost like we share the same brain, got carried away with the crowd and ended up pulling out a street sign and carrying it off the road. It is shocking what you will do when you're in a group of people, like absolutely shocking. That was on the news, actually, by the way. They showed the little sign going down the road in the mob of people. Yeah,
like trying to be the cool guy, whatever thing it was.
Well, if I remember correctly, whoever this person was, like literally there was two of them who didn't even go to the school. They were visiting the other friend and they were like, oh yeah, this is so awesome. Let's go pull off that street sign. It was something as stupid as that. And two people started doing this, and then there was 15 people doing this, and it is remarkable how quickly a street sign will come out of the ground when you got a bunch of people doing that to it. So consensus can be incredibly powerful. And again, one of the key factors on that one is to also remember, though, if you are in a situation where you're unsure, you're more likely to follow what the consensus is. This is one of the people stand in lines, like just because they'll stand in a line, or there's studies where people will have, you get a group of people looking up at the air and people will walk up to them and they'll all start staring and they'll stare, what are we all looking at, kind of a thing. So that is consensus. And then, so that's the 6 influence strategies that were in the original Influence by Robert Cialdini. Mm-hmm. And then he has introduced a new one, and I have actually not finished this book yet because I have 16,000 other books I need to read. But he introduced a 7th principle actually in Persuasion, and that's the idea of unity. And that one really has come to prominence with the social media, mm-hmm. because where you can now have the minority can amplify a voice to perceive themselves as a majority and really have significant repercussions. And we can see this more and more, where again, small groups have oversized influence because they unify, they codify a voice, and they maintain that voice in such a way that it sort of amplifies and reverberates in a much bigger way and attracts more people to it, because now it's the greater us rather than the individual me.
And would you say that many people are looking for someone to follow? That most people would tend to be followers than leaders in a sense?
I would say that. And most of it, I would know. We're Americans. We don't follow anybody. That's the biggest bunch of crock. Like it isn't. We and particularly true leadership is actually relatively rare.
Yeah.
Right? And true leaders are actually relatively rare. And people who say, I want to be the leader, often don't. There's leadership versus following. There's different there's some significant differences there. And once you're in that leadership role, it can be extraordinarily difficult, to say the least. Like you have to, there's a personal fortitude that you have to have, or you have to be a sociopath, which is one of the reasons that, or not sociopath, a psychopath, which is, there's a lot of psychopaths actually in CEOs. But
that's another episode. Huh?
It is fascinating, like psychopathy and behavior, and there is an advantage to it. In particularly in kind of a cutthroat rule. I mean, in fact, the guy who did the original research was like 10% of CEOs were super high on psychopathy. I think it's actually probably a little bit higher than that, because psychopaths are actually good at mirroring emotions as well. But that's a long way to say is most of us, most of us are we're looking for someone to follow. Mm-hmm. We're looking for a leader. We're looking for somebody. We're like looking for something that kind of reinforces the idea of this, I'm going to be like them, or if I follow them and tell me what to do, then I'm okay. I'm a good person, kind of a deal. But we've seen this in this day and age of the internet. You can take these influence strategies and you can put them on steroids, things that have never been able to be achieved because you didn't have the reach that we have now. And like you had talked about with the liking that button is a simple, it's a very small commitment step. Mm-hmm. Now you develop an algorithm around that little teeny step of liking a photograph that then starts to feed you new things. Mm-hmm. And then you can like them and consistently following them. Yeah. I was reading something about kind of, this is sort of like the new warfare of the 21st century, where Russia has been known to do it. China has been known to do it. And they're introducing things in social media. And one of the most fascinating was with like kind of white supremacists and that type of behavior. And they were starting it with like pictures of puppies and things, like things that you would not even suspect that you would click. And then it would start subtly feeding you these ads, these statements, these things. And it's that kind of one little step, couple, little baby step after baby step. And then all of a sudden you are somewhere that you never even planned to be. And if you're not aware of it, you may not even care anymore, Yeah. So anyway, this is an introduction to the 6, now 7 influence strategies, first kind of codified together by Robert Cialdini through both his personal work, where he would go to sales training, and then the scientific studies where they actually studied the amount of change with this. Those being reciprocity, I scratch your back, you scratch mine; scarcity, create an environment where there's limited choice and or limited time for that option, so it is now precious, and that could be, again, doesn't have to be true, it could be false scarcity. Authority, an authority figure, from another one, from a perspective of a physician. It may make sense. We did that thing on professionalism with Dr. Paul Thomas, when he wrote the book on this. Mm-hmm. It may make sense to dress your best in clinic, to dress in a way that people perceive a doctor should look like. Mm-hmm. Now, if you're a surgeon, you probably get away with scrubs and a white coat. If you are an internist, it's probably, a tie at least may help you to discuss things with your patients mm-hmm. better, having a sense of authority. Consistency, take the small step is the first step to a very long journey, and you can end up in places that you never thought you would. Those little commitment steps being both good and bad, and you can use them for yourself as well as others. Liking, those we like, we tend to listen to. We also tend to do things when they ask us to. And then lastly, consensus, where we look for the group to kind of tell us what behaviors we should be doing, is particularly in times when we don't know what we're supposed to be doing, when we're unsure. And then lastly, which is in the newest edition, that principle of unity, the principle of us versus them. Yeah.
And in general, kind of, I know this doesn't tie in with Maslow's hierarchy and stuff, but a sense of meaning and purpose feels like that unity part. Like, don't you think?
Yeah. And this is the part that just drives me crazy, because I have all this stuff and I have all these books and I have all these, and then you start seeing these overlap. And I actually have, as I said, I have the Scott Barry Kaufman book where he has a lot of Maslow's work, which is Transcendence. And they talk about the science of kind of personal growth, kind of a deal. And there is something in there with that sense of meaning and purpose is huge. That's a core fundamental component of being a human.
Right.
And anyway, it's just a long way to say is that you can see these influence principles and how they operate, and then you kind of see these core human needs.
Yeah.
And they all sort of build into each other. And then, just kind of introduce another book that I'm hoping to talk about in the future was Black and White Thinking, which I did a Saturday Salutations on. And what I really liked about that was kind of these three kind of frames that we see the world through. They're the kind of universal human reactions. And he kind of argues how the evolutionary, you can kind of see these being development, those being perception of fight versus flight being the first one, us versus them being the second one, being able to identify your tribe from the other tribe. And then the last is a sense of right versus wrong, that sense of morality. And you start filtering all these principles through this because we have a need to belong.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can deliver these messages in such a way that they kind of introduce a level of threat that you have to do something to prevent. And then if you can introduce an aspect of it's us versus them through that. And lastly is right versus wrong, that your actions then have a morality focus, and the other person that you're being persuaded to do something against is immoral in such a way. It's a huge power. I mean, the psychological power behind this is profound.
Mm-hmm.
In some of the examples that were used, really simple messages on and how these are being advertised to people are simple slogans that are literally like 2 to 3 words, and some of them you can guess, that are extraordinarily powerful and really reverberate on a fundamental, almost primeval basis on you. Like these things that when we were running across and worried about getting eaten by a lion, to increase that sense of fight or flight in a message, we still have a tendency to respond to it very, very aggressively. So the more you know about this stuff, guys, I mean, I know you probably get tired. Dr. Cuccaro, all you want to talk about is psychology and persuasion and this and that and the brain and neuroscience. This because it's all around you. And the more you know it, at a minimum, it helps to become more aware of your world. And when people are trying to apply these things on you, and then hopefully you can, if the more you learn about them, you can potentially apply them in a constructive way with your friends, family members, your patients in your day-to-day interactions in a way that can help them to lead to a more healthy lifestyle and behaviors.
Yeah. This is like so powerful in a way that, like, I think if you don't realize, I mean, maybe if 3 or 4 years ago you didn't think there was that power behind it, I think by now most of us in America or even in this world have a little bit better understanding, especially in the United States. I think it's pretty clear that this is important. And I did bring up the Maslow's. I will, before I take us out, was going to say the self-actualization for the transcendence. It's interesting. Some of the things in there is this creativity and the spontaneity and problem solving, and but it's like all these like activities that people are promoted to go do. Like it's funny how it like fits right in that little part of his triangle, and how it appeals to this like growth need. It almost makes them feel alive, like it brings an energy to them and they feel like part of something. So yeah, I mean, but it's one mind affecting all these other minds, or a computer, and they get together to do something they probably wouldn't have ever done if it was just them in their home and never interacted with them.
That's the thing that is always sort of shocking to me, and gives me a profound appreciation for like human psychology.
Yes.
Is people can be influenced to do things that they never thought that they would ever do.
Yes.
And it's not because they're inherently a bad person, but it's because they're a human. Now that's also, it's an explanation, but it's not an excuse. That's the other thing to remember about all this stuff. Because none of these things are 100%. Like no one has the ability to reach into your brain and just say, you are this person. And there's always little moments in time where you can potentially interrupt that path. But it does, at least for me, it gives a greater sense of kind of understanding how people get led that way. And I still default and I still get really mad, and people have heard me rant and rave on Saturday Salutations usually about certain things. But it's also scary to kind of recognize how this stuff can be developed in others. Like if you don't appreciate this stuff and you don't kind of pay attention to it, humans are remarkably more malleable than you would think.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of scary, but at the same time, it means malleable. If you more you learn about it, the more you can help other people and use the same principles, the more we can kind of amplify the goods in society as well.
Yeah. Well, I think that everything, you gave the summary, so I won't go through that again, but this is incredibly powerful on a personal level, in a relationship, in a household, marriage, on a community level, at your work, at the societal level. There is not one aspect of society that's not affected by it. So I really think this is one of the most important episodes from a baseline understanding of so many things that we have to deal with, that I really hope a lot of people, if you're listening to this, you've listened to the whole thing probably, so you got to hear it. But we'll make sure to put the link for that book if you want to dive deeper into that. Yeah, I've enjoyed doing this conversation, Kevin. So thank you for bringing up that book, Persuasion. I have it on my shelf. I need to read that one.
That's the second book. We that would be another episode we can talk about persuasion, but not right now.
Not today.
Not today.
Yeah. But for those of you listening, I'm Melissa Katie, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro. And if you don't know what the Change Physician is all about, and you just came across this episode, feel free to go to changephysician.com. You can be part of the community, find out more about us. Whether you're a physician or a physician ally, we'd love to have you as part of the community, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Take care.
Stay well, folks.